Hi everybody, once again it's Saturday, March 5th, 2011. Thanks for stopping by. Now I just saw a very disturbing video which showed a Muslim organization which was holding a charity event for battered women and also for the homeless. Now they were holding a charity event to raise money for people who are less fortunate. And there was a huge demonstration outside of this charity event, which was basically, objecting to the fact that these people exist. Now, they weren't objecting to terrorist acts. They weren't objecting to radicalized Islam. They were objecting to Muslims in general. And of course, that includes all Muslims, whether they are violent or nonviolent, whether they are extreme or moderate, whether they are tolerant or intolerant. All Muslims are painted as terrorists by these people. So what they did was they stood there with American flags wrapped around Israeli flags, and they screamed at the top of their lungs at women and children who were going to a charity event to raise money for battered women and homeless people. Now that just seems so incredibly insane to me. I mean, at that point you kind of get the idea that there's no reasoning with these people. There's nothing that you can say, that would get through to them, because they're calling children and women terrorists just because of their basic identity, just because they are Muslim, no other reason. And they're screaming at them. They're screaming at women about Muslims beating women. They're screaming at children about pedophilia. And it's so depraved and so sick and so cowardly, actually, because it's all driven by fear in one form or another. Either they're afraid of Muslims or they're afraid of something else that they aren't really willing to stand up to, so they make Muslims the scapegoats. Sort of like a person who gets yelled at by his boss and then goes home and beats his wife because his wife can't fight back. That's what this really represents to me. It's either they're just so petrified of terror, of not just terrorists but Muslims in general, that they're screaming their lungs out, or they're so cowed down by something they're not willing to face that they take it out on people that they know they can abuse and get away with abusing them. Somebody powerless, somebody that's routinely scapegoated, like a Jew or a Muslim, if Jews aren't available, right? Or if anti-Semitism is no longer acceptable, you can still bash the Muslims. Okay, so that's kind of what I think of that whole idea. Now, I saw this video and I saw people saying, well, Islamophobia doesn't exist, or these people aren't Islamophobic, or Islamophobia isn't racism. And what they seem to be really glossing over is the fact that you have dozens or maybe hundreds of grown adult men and women screaming at children and screaming at women. Grown men screaming at women, and grown men and women screaming at children. And they're going to say, oh, but that's not Islamophobia. Or, oh, but Islamophobia isn't racism. So let's just think about this for a second. Why is racism wrong in the first place? Well, racism is wrong because it's prejudice. Now, what's prejudice? Prejudice is judging someone before you know anything about them. Now, prejudice is usually based on some arbitrary factor, like race, or religion, or ethnicity, or nationality, or language, or age, or sex, or sexual orientation, or ability, or disability. You get the picture. It can be based on a lot of things. Now, each one of those prejudices is absolutely despicable and indefensible. But why? Why is it so wrong to be a racist? And why is it so wrong to be prejudiced against people that you don't know? Well, it's for a very simple reason. Because racism is prejudice based on something that no one has any control over. Black people don't decide to be born black any more than white people decide to be born white. You can't give yourself credit for being born white. It happened without any intervention from you at all. And you can't give anyone any grief over not being born white, because likewise they had nothing to do with it. Now, religion is a little bit more complicated than that. But basically, it's just as arbitrary and just as much not a choice. And I'll tell you why. People don't decide to be born into Muslim countries or Muslim societies or Muslim families. People, they are usually, 99% of the time, they are the religion of their parents. And they don't choose that. Okay. Now, they choose their own interpretation of their religion. And you have no fucking clue what that is until you ask them. You can't decide that some Muslim you don't know is a jihadi. You have to ask them and find out. You can't just decide that they're a child-raping wife-beater. You have to actually find out. And they're innocent until proven guilty, by the way. So you can't just convict Muslims of raping children or beating their wives just because they're Muslims. You have to have evidence beyond a reasonable doubt that would stand up in a court of law. Okay, if you have that, fine. Convict them of the crime and then punish them. Otherwise, you don't have a right to say jack about them one way or the other because you don't know. So, and another thing about religion, even for atheists, it's not a choice. Okay, you don't decide to believe in God or not to believe in God. Either you do or you don't. And your brain is going to make that choice for you, You can't, I couldn't just decide to believe in God one day. I could not do that. That's why when someone asks me to convert to some religion or another, no one's ever asked me to convert to Islam, by the way. It's always Christianity. But, it's just a useless request because I could not convert to Christianity even if I wanted to. And there have been times when I have wanted to. It just doesn't work. Okay? And likewise, I don't really think that someone who really believes in God can just decide one day that they don't believe. It just doesn't work that way. Either you believe or you don't. Now, that's not a choice. And it's not right. It's not moral to judge other people and to condemn other people that you know nothing about based on things that they have absolutely no control over. Makes sense, doesn't it? It is easy to see that that is the category that racism falls under. It's sort of easy to trick yourself into believing that other forms of prejudice are different, that they don't fall into that same category. But it's false. All these forms of prejudice that I mentioned earlier are exactly equivalent to racism and exactly as immoral and unfair because they're based on exactly the same thing. You don't choose what religion you're born into. You don't choose what race you're born into. You don't choose what sex you are. You don't choose your sexual orientation. You don't choose your age. You don't choose your level of ability. So, and you don't choose your nationality unless you move to another country. So, if you want to try and say that Islamophobia isn't racism, which actually it is, but even if you want to say that, so what? It's the same thing. It results in people screaming at children. Thanks for watching.